Christina, now that we have a feel for how formulas work within Excel, one of the most powerful things it does is it has all these functions built in. You know, I mentioned earlier it's smarter than me. It's because it knows how to do all sorts of calculations that I could do it if I was really forced to, but it would take me a while. And why do that when Excel will do it
Exactly.
for me? So we're going to look at some of the simple ones that I obviously can do first of all,
Okay.
which are just some basic common functions. And you'll notice we're here in this commission worksheet, and we're on cell D9, and notice we have a header over there in cell A9 that says total.
Sure.
So basically we want to see what our total sales are.
Okay.
Now we have done this before. Do you remember how we did it previously?
Did we use the sum function?
Right, and we're not going to use the one on the Home tab right now, but let's just take a look. Of course, we have up here on the Home tab the Autosum, and we could click that, and it basically immediately looks above the cell for numbers. And if it finds numbers, it adds all the numbers until it runs out of numbers,
Okay.
or a blank cell. If it doesn't find numbers there, then it goes off and looks to the left.
Okay.
So that's how the Autosum function works, and we have a nifty little tool there on the formula bar that does that. We also, because Autosum's the only one built into that, I'm just going to show you this with some, we can just start typing it in. When we use Autosum, it starts off equals what? Do you remember?
Sum.
Right. So just start typing there in the cell, equals,
All right.
and then type the S.
Ah.
Notice what happens. Immediately, all the functions built into Excel that start with an S show up in a drop-down.
Okay.
Now, if you keep typing, you could scroll down, but if you keep typing, it will keep searching based on your typing. And notice now we see sum, and you could either choose sum or you could keep typing sum, whichever way you want to go. And you'll double-click on it.
Perfect.
And now it shows us the format. And this is where we'd have to go in and tell it what cell references we want to add. And so
Okay.
we can just click and drag. So you can go up there, and which cells are we going to add?
We want to add all the sales, so that would be D2 through D7.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so how are you going to put that formula into the cell? Complete it.
Enter?
Sure, enter, or you can click on the check mark up in the formula bar or tab. Anyway, just to finish inputting the information in the cell.
Okay.
Now you'll notice, what do I have row 10 set up to give us a formula for?
Average.
Average. Average is another function that's a very common function built into Excel. This time we're going to go and look at something called the insert function button.
Okay.
If you look up on the formula bar, right to the left of the formula bar, there's an FX. If you point to it, notice it says insert function. That's our insert function button.
Okay.
So click on that, and we get the insert function dialog box. And this dialog box is great. First of all, you can search for a function. You can just type in a description of what you want to do, and it can search. Or you can go on and look at categories of functions and look for what you want.
Oh, okay.
Notice we're looking at the category of most recently used. If you click on the drop down, you'll see there are all sorts of categories in there. And we're going to take a look at some of these in some other modules, but there's quite a few there. One quick note, notice at the bottom of the list there's one called compatibility. We're in Excel 2010. A lot of changes have occurred in the formulas in this version. Compatibility allows you to use functions from the older versions, functions that have been renamed in this version. So if you have a spreadsheet from a previous version and it's one of the functions that's been renamed, you can use compatibility.
Oh, okay.
That said, compatibility will eventually disappear. So it's great to use initially, but you probably at some point want to go back and replace those functions in your spreadsheets
Learn the new ones.
with the new ones, right?
Gotcha.
But it is there.
Okay.
In case people are accustomed to, and they're looking for functions that they don't see here now.
Okay.
But there are a lot of different categories. We're just going to stay with the most recently used category, and you'll notice sum is right there. Average is in there, and there's several others there, if, hyperlink, count, and so forth. If you click on average,
Okay.
notice below the function list you have a format. Looks very similar to the sum format. Average, and then in parentheses you have the numbers that you're averaging.
Sure.
It even tells you what it does. It returns the average of its arguments, which can be numbers or names or arrays or references that contain numbers.
Okay.
So we're just going to choose that. We'll click OK. All right, so you'll notice that just like in the sum function, the average function is taking a stab at, well, what is it you really want to average? And it's found cells D2 through D9. Now, is that correct?
No, I don't want it to include the total.
Right, that'd be like adding everything in there twice. That would
Right.
really mess up our average, wouldn't it?
It would.
So what cell references do we want?
I think that we would prefer D2 through D7, just like we had for sum.
Right. And you can either change that right here in the text box and just change that to a D7, or we do know that little button there allows us to do what?
Collapse, select, and then enter it in.
Right, we can collapse this dialog box, go out and highlight the cell range we want, click on the expand, and we're back here and we have what we want.
Good.
The other good thing is notice to the right of where it says number 1, we see the data it's pulling, and notice about halfway down the dialog box it says equals 20,800. It's telling me my answer before I ever get out of here.
Oh, okay.
So I could literally, if I just wanted the answer, just cancel at this point, but I want to put it in here, so I click OK,
All right.
and there you go.
Perfect.
There's my average. Now there are several things in there. By the way, just hit delete for a moment. Let's remove that. And let's type equals and start typing average. Notice as you're typing, it's going to recognize it. So if you know the name of the function, you can just begin typing. And if you're comfortable with making the selection of the cell ranges yourself, you can do that.
Okay.
If you're not, then you can go up and click on the Insert Function button. And let's go up and click on our Insert Function button. And we can come in here and use the different functions. A couple of functions that might be useful to you. Count is a really great function if you have a long column of information or a long row of information or several cells maybe in a block, and you want to know how many of them actually contain numbers, because sometimes maybe there's not data in some of the cells, and there could be, but there's not. Then count will count the number that have numbers in them. It will total up that. You have max. It will look at the maximum number. So in a sales organization, sometimes you want to know, well, who had the highest sales. So we could choose max. In fact, let's do that one. Let's click OK on max. And we're going to have to fix our cell range. Why don't you just click up there and change the 9 to a 7, because we know that the cell range is D2 through D7.
Okay.
And we can click OK. And there's the max instead. Of course, we don't want the average to stay over there, and we would change that, but we're just looking right now.
Sure.
There is a formula function called min, M-I-N, and it does exactly the opposite of max. It looks for the lowest number.
Okay.
So those are some of the most commonly used ones, and they usually show up in the most recently used.
Oh, great. Okay. So those
Okay.
are easy to get to.
They're very easy to get to. Now, in the other modules, we're going to look at some of the other categories of formulas or functions. One of the things I'd like to point out to you before we move from here is up on our ribbon, we do have a formulas tab. If you go click on formulas, there are all the categories. Notice the insert function's way over there to the left.
Okay.
And then the Autosum is next, the recently used, and then you have your various categories.
So those are the same that was in the drop-down box.
Exactly.
That we just looked at.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, so that's the beginning of functions.